So I think it's gonna be the three of us again.
Oh, yay!
Yay!
Another triad. Let me turn my afro pop off. What are we talking about today?
Well, I
You guys didn't solve
specific
racism while I was gone? I thought you were supposed to. Wasn't that your job, Rachel? One of you guys was
white female
supposed
and
to solve racism. I thought.
Oh, yeah. I was gonna get y'all off the table first, and I was gonna come in hot at the end.
Knock it out. Yeah. World peace. World peace next week.
accomplished we accomplished everything in the last 3 weeks, No, but no, thank you guys for coming because I this was a little bit like off the routine, and I think it's I was kind of on a bi-weekly or bi-monthly routine, but I think nice little break over the Easter weekend was needed. However, in that time, I feel like all of the things accumulated even more than what we can keep up with, which is pretty on point. But today I really wanted to kind of make the focus being I think the topic of racism is been hyper focused on Black Lives Matter and Black people's experience of racism. So that's still there, but I think the concept of Asian Americans and racism has been pretty apparent, at least in the media the past few weeks. So I really just wanted to take today as kind of like make sure we introduce and like fold in the other minorities and really talk about like, okay, what's it been like to experience watching this happen, and really holding space for anyone who has had any reactions to it and to need to talk about it.
Well,
a little bit out of your political element there, Brandon, but
no, I mean, that's what you don't understand. Race is inherently political. Like, it's inherently political. You can't talk about race without talking about the politics behind it. Now, the names may change. Like, if we're talking about, pre-Civil War, Republicans were, on our side in regard to freeing the slaves. But then, afterward, we start having issues with the Democrats. So, like, it's about power and distribution of power. Even when we're talking about Asian American violence, when you're in going beyond, African American race, gender, sexuality, religion, these are all power points in regard to giving power to a section of people that fulfills a certain, checks off certain parameters and depriving other individuals of that power. So I know you it's kind of tongue in your cheek. You were kind of being tongue in cheek and being like, yeah, stay out of politics, whatever. But no, I mean, we're inevitably always going to end up there some way, somehow, because this is about the main reason why we're trying to deal with this is so we can address inequitable power dynamics. And in the case of race, the deprivation of the ability to fulfill one's full potential, to live their fullest life, to have a life at all, as a result of being a particular, race. And that's the same, it's the same way in regard to, Asian American racism against, Asian Americans. They were allowed into this country by those people who had power, and they were put into a position where, yes, you can be part of us. You can work for us. You can help build our railroads. You can make food. But as far as having the ability to influence the system and buy into this dream, no, we're not gonna allow you to do that, and we're gonna let you know where your place is, just like we've let every other group of people before you know where their place is. And that's what you're seeing right now, is just basically a resurgence of that.
So I've had this kind of question, and since I appreciate your involvement because it opens you up for being an educator, which I know you like to do, but you don't have to do it all the time. But in this case, I'm going to ask for it.
Okay.
So one thing that's kind of posed on my mind is, I was watching the news, and I think it was the attack on the older Asian woman in New York
Mm-hmm.
by a black man or someone who appeared to be African
Yeah.
American.
Mm-hmm.
And so what is that? What is that like? I guess to see, like, now, like, and I guess, how do you understand where that, not, I know you have to understand where he individually would come from, but as a black man, like, watching that happen, how does that influence this whole, movement
Well,
toward,
here's what here's what it does. I hear where you're going. Um, First of all, there is a temptation to attribute. I mean, whenever you start talking about race, immediately people start rushing to whatever team they identify with. I'm going to be on team white. I'm going to be on team black. I'm on team red. And so now you have this situation that can be looked at through that partisan, that bias lens. Team black, one of your guys, technical foul. We need to talk about this, right?
rejected
Exactly.
from the game?
You gotta answer for Ray, whatever. I don't even know what the dude's name is. But the whole thing is that's a pitfall, in my opinion. That's focusing on the individual, who is perpetuating a certain ideology, which isn't like, anybody in regard to perpetuating racism. I'm not one who believes that, any group of people cannot be racist. You can say, there are some people who are like, well, black people can't be racist or whatever in America because they don't run systems. There's different levels of racism. There is systemic racism, where you have racism that's been codified in the law. Slavery was an example of systemic racism. But racism is basically you exerting your power. If you have power in any given situation, there's a bunch of black people in the church and a white person comes in and they're like, oh, we hate you white people, we're kicking you out or whatever, then that's racist. That group of black people is saying, we have the power here to eliminate this individual from our space, and we're going to use that power disproportionately against this individual to make them feel less than because we believe they're less than for whatever reason. So let me take that same analogy and carry that over into, policing. We recognize that all police are not white. We recognize we have police from a bunch of different backgrounds. We have black cops. Black cops can advance the notion of white supremacy when it comes to racism in our system by disproportionately targeting black citizens. Both black people, but they can do it. So a black person can be racist against another black person. That's why the situation that occurred in regard to this Asian woman is no different to me. It's this individual basically saying, because a group of individuals or an ideology says that you are less than, that I'm going to subscribe to that mentality and I'm going to treat you less than. Wherever that mentality comes from, whether you want to call it black supremacy, white supremacy, Christian supremacy, male supremacy, or whatever, that is coming from a place that they're choosing to identify with and may or may not be connected with their race. I say all that to say, at the end of the day, everybody is accountable for their actions. And you're also accountable for what ideologies you subscribe to. So as a black man, I don't feel a responsibility for that black man and his ignorance because I don't know where he was coming from in regard to making that decision. You would have to ask or inquire. And I feel the same way about mass shooters. Like in regard to there's a quick run all the time to say, oh, here goes another white mass shooter. So, that's a representative of, a group of people that wants to kill all black people. If they have not conveyed that ideology or stated that ideology, we could just be dealing with, a mental health situation. I believe all mass shootings are mental health situations, but this person could have been schizophrenic. This person could have been pissed off, at his job and gotten fired and laid off and gone there for financial reasons to shoot everybody up. Like, I wait before I cast that judgment. Then if we find out this individual was on Stormfront, love some Tucker Carlson and, had a history of posting bigoted stuff, then like, okay, all right, now we have an issue regarding white supremacy. But just because the individual has a complexion, does not mean that necessarily that's what they subscribe to.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes. I connected in a couple of different areas. I mean, you talked a lot about, I think the biggest thing that stood out to me is like, what is, and how does the responsibility of an individual influence this bigger cycle of this discussion about racism? Yeah. But you said a lot of things. That's really how I can pull out a lot, but I think that is where, if I talk about like the perspective, right? You as a Black man, you're saying like, okay, I as an individual do not have responsibility for how this other person who is involved in this act, makes decisions. And, don't get me started on the mental health influence, which I'm sure I'll end up in at some point. But that to me, I guess, kind of spurred off, on my end, where I said is like, what is the responsibility as a human being now to, I don't want to say it's like hold people accountable, but like, this is not just something, I guess like my mind goes in a lot of different directions, but one thing is like, it's not something that's just Black people are influenced by. And how does one person's individual responsibility influence the responsibility of us, all of us, regardless of you take the construct of race out of it, to address this? And then I'll throw in there is like, it makes me wonder about like the responsibility in the moment of like those people who witness this.
Yeah. No, I mean, the same thing was said about, whenever George Floyd was, murdered, what was the responsibility? Like people just stood by. But the thing is, you're dealing with a couple different things at play. You're dealing with, overt racism and trauma that's happening to individuals, in the moment. Like we think about trauma in regard to the actual, victims of whatever is going down. Like in this case, this Asian woman being attacked or whatever. But people who witness that trauma, are also being, traumatized. Like, the individuals who watched George Floyd die literally watch somebody murdered like right in front of them. And normally, like after something like that happens, like, you send, people off for counseling and whatnot, some people, can be scarred for life. But, in this situation, I don't know if those bystanders were given any kind, of counseling whatsoever. But, whenever you witness something like that, it's a fight or flight response. Now, you may get angry, you may be upset, but then here's the other factor. You're also dealing with, representatives of the state. I thoroughly believe, and I can unequivocally state right now that if you're talking about just a gang of, people, beating up a guy and, choking him out in broad daylight, those bystanders would have acted differently. I feel like they would have. But the thing is, once you see that badge, once you see those flashing lights, we're programmed to look at the state and say, okay, whatever's happening right now is by default acceptable. Like cops are good. This cannot be bad. This cannot be wrong. It looks bad, but I really don't know the full story. So we start to rationalize what's happening in front of us, and we recognize, like, it didn't take that long for George Floyd to be, choked out. So
I just want to add something.
Go ahead.
No, I think you're kind of, part of the reason why I brought this space together is because I think we're, I don't want to say back at the same spot, but if anything, we're continuously experiencing something that bring up these 2 points. It's like trauma in turn becomes the barrier for us to be able to take responsibility to do something different, right? Like those people watching that woman, I'm not going to say I wouldn't have stepped in, and there's a I mean, he appeared very large, and as a large person, I'm not just going to go rush into another large person's aggressiveness. I'll do my best to, you know, do something. But yeah, that those kind of stress responses and that trauma in turn becomes the barrier for us to be able to do something different. That, I think, I mean, as best as I can possibly say, is a very blanket term across the board for any individual in any context, whether it's racism or just anything, is if we attach ourselves to, or I'm sorry, if we have a trauma, we usually end up getting attached to the situation, whether it be, you know, emotionally, because we don't know how to cope with that. Talking about it is one way to cope. Sometimes we have to go to therapy. And then the responsibility now shifts to not only just the greater, you know, good of, or not, I don't want to say good, but like greater problem of addressing how we can change this individually, but it now becomes that we have an individual need. I have to go address the trauma that I experienced witnessing something like that. The trauma, I mean, sometimes even talking about it is a resurfacing of that trauma. And, you know, if anything, I'm, you know, I try to promote this space to like have that kind of takeaway, is that this is, you know, one way to deal with it and to cope with that trauma, but then also it is an announcement for people to pay attention to their own responsibility for self, to be able to, you know, get back to having and dealing with and having the conversations about how to change these things. It has to start with self. Sorry, that was a little around the bush there, but
yeah, no, I mean, and you were talking earlier about like, you know, what's our responsibility to the individuals, you know, after, I mean, to the situation after an individual perpetuates, you know, a crime like the attack that we saw on, you know, this elderly Asian woman. And our responsibility, I feel, you know, instead of like looking to, you know, into, instead of regressing into tribalism and saying, oh, it's your team, your problem, it's for us just to have discussions like this and talk about, you know, how you're viewing this situation. Through what lens are you viewing the situation? Some people may be looking at it as, you know, an attack on, you know, our Asian population. Some people may be looking at it as an attack on women, because we're talking about a woman here who was assaulted and a man who felt comfortable enough to assault this woman. So there could be a religious component. You know, there could be a gender, a sexist, you know, we don't know what actually went down, and that's not dismissing what went down, but we also don't know how we are all seeing it. How we see it determines, you know, how we're going to reconcile our personal experiences with the reality of the situation and move forward, you know, together. Basically, if I don't feel like my needs are being met, having witnessed this situation, if I don't feel like this world is safer, for instance, if I'm a woman and I don't feel like we are collectively addressing this situation in the best way possible to prevent this from happening again, then I'm going to have some difficulty moving forward. That may make me want to go out and protest. That may make me want to, you know, go out and start, you know, lecturing about, you know, protecting women or whatever. So same thing, as a Black person watching George Floyd get killed, you know, it's like, you look around, you're like, this is not cool. This can't be a standard. Like, I shouldn't have to worry about this particular thing happening to me or someone I love because of some undefined reasons. And those undefined reasons that you all seem comfortable with look a lot like racism. So, you know, we need to address this moving forward.
So would you say that what you've said thus far is that your individual experience with watching these things unfold, whether it be the trial, Derek Chauvin, or I don't know, I mean, if you had seen the videos of like any of the attacks, but like, would you say that encompasses your perspective on how this has impacted you?
Yeah, I mean, it's not so much, the thing about these incidents is there's no singular lens through which to view them. Like there's the actual events themselves, like, you know, the videotape, we saw the videotape of George Floyd, but then there's everything else around it, like how the media, takes it and spins it, how politicians take it and, manipulate it or whatever. How your coworkers receive it, what's your immediate environment, your immediate circle of people, how they respond. And so there's different levels, of trauma in regard to experiencing it. So in regard to like, have I ever, been choked out by the cops? No, I haven't had that experience, but I've had the unfortunate pleasure of witnessing this now as a Black male in conjunction with a whole slew of images that are similar to this, that go back way before Floyd. So this is just another one that lets me know, this could happen to you some way, somehow. You might want to speak out about this. So at least you can say you said some shit before it happens to you, if it does happen to you, because it can.
So I think if I understood what you were saying, I do agree that there is no, I feel like, one true lens to receive the events that have been happening, but I disagree in the sense that there is one way in order to perceive what is happening. And that is like, you don't necessarily have to understand what it's like to be attacked by someone, or to know what, I mean, this part, the whole reason this exists is like to have experienced racism in your own self, but to watch those things happen, does it evoke something? Does it, I guess I'm asking you to like sit in your perspective, because our individual perspective is how
you asked me personally how I'm receiving this.
Yes. Yeah.
It's fucked up. Like, yeah. I mean, pretty much. Like, I mean, it's fucked up. Like, I mean, like I said, I try to like tie myself in, but like I said before, like I've been watching images like this since I was a kid. Like, I mean, the funny thing is, and I say this to people all the time, we have ratings in regard to like, the media that we consume. We have the Motion Picture Association of America that determines what's R, what's rated X, what's NC-17 through some ambiguous determination factor. But yeah, like we've decided that there are certain things certain audiences shouldn't see. But when it comes to the history of this nation, in order for children of color to be able to be aware enough to protect themselves, to be safe, to know, there might be danger here, they have to be exposed to things that are way outside of G. And so, yeah, like, I grew up, hearing about, I'll never forget, like, there was this book growing up called The Black Book. And in it, there were just images about like, the Black experience in America, because one of the responsibilities that parents of color have to have is to teach like the right history, or an accurate rendition of history that you're not going to get at school. And so in this book, on one of the pages, it talks about the Nebraska race riots. And basically there's an image of this man who was burned, well, he was lynched, burned, castrated, and you see a bunch of individuals, a bunch of white men standing around his charred corpse. And they sold the rope they used to lynch him for 10 cents. They chopped it up and they sold the pieces for 10 cents. So this was an image, one of many, that Emmett Till, like, you watch these images over and over again. And so you as a child are forced to be traumatized, or if you're a parent, you can say, oh, I'm not going to show my child that or whatever. And they're oblivious and they think, oh, well, if I get pulled over by the cops, or if I say the wrong thing to the wrong person at the wrong time, who's the wrong color, nothing's going to happen to me. We operate differently. Those of us who have been exposed operate differently because we know, this could happen to you. So personally, yeah, traumatized again. But then I'm angry because I'm like, there are people denying that it's trauma, denying that it's a problem. And it's not just something that's relative to me. I'm also recognizing that, the cops did this to this man, and there is no attempt. I mean, I'm pretty sure they didn't send out trauma specialists to go speak to all the bystanders about what they saw and why and whatnot, because the cops are too busy trying to get their story together about what had happened. And you don't want to have some representative of the state going out and telling people, you know, what, you know, they should be feeling or getting any other perspective. You got to have your own narrative that you advance. So, but I recognize that nothing is being done to address the trauma that I'm experiencing. Nothing's going to be done to address the trauma that other people are experiencing. As a result of this, we're going to have to find some way to find, you know, some peace of mind in regard to the trauma, if we can afford it. This country doesn't provide free mental health care. My children, I have to go and talk to my children, you know, about it, because once it gets in the news, of course, my children are going to know, you know, that another person of color was killed in this way, and they're going to fear for themselves. And I got to go with no answers. I can't tell them, well, if you do everything this way, this won't happen to you, because every single killing lets us know that it doesn't matter what you do, you know, this could potentially be you. So there are levels in regard to the trauma that you know I'm experiencing. I feel self-aware enough to be able to mention, you know, a variety of them, but I'm also, like I said before, I'm mentioning them from the perspective of Brandon as a Black man. Now, you know, there's a Black woman out there with a son who's feeling trauma in a whole nother kind of way, because she's got to ready herself potentially for, you know, her son being killed like that. How does she communicate that to her child? As a father, I can empathize to a certain extent, but I fathered a child. I didn't bring a child out of my body. So that female perspective is a little bit different.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's so many different intersections into how one's perception can have. So I know I'm like barely scraping surface with just having these conversations, but it's scraping surface. So, but I do struggling to think of what I should. I was thinking earlier, you know, if we don't start normalizing the experience of suffering for all, the experience for like to understand one suffering makes it's very challenging. So it either and I knew that was going to be so broad to the point where I couldn't like explain it, but you know, it's easy to empathize with, you know, the notice of one person suffering, but this happens to, you know, every single person that watches a video of, you know, the George Floyd killing, and then to take into account the personal experience and how that, you know, triggers someone else's true experience with being physically assaulted. It doesn't even have to be out of a, you know, an experience of racism, but an assault. So really trying to hone in on, you know, where do we stand in understanding that everyone, but primarily Black people or a minority person of color that has experienced multiple traumas and microaggressions and micro traumas, and whether it's watching a video, having these conversations is why I'm so, you know, grateful for people who do attend, because it does resurface things and it doesn't always allow a relief from that trauma. And it also can potentially make the next person turn their backs on one another because they don't necessarily know how to cope with the day-to-day experience of something that is that intense. That's all. Sorry, I got a little rambly there, but
Keela trying to say something.
Yeah, I was you probably saw me like get ready to. I honestly have not seen the video or any stills of the assault on the older Asian lady. I literally attending this is the first time that I've actually gotten details to know even partially what happened. I continued to see, you know, Asian Lives Matter and things like that, but I had no idea why or what was going on. And the one thing that I'll say, I guess, kind of really just tailgating off of what Sarah said, is we have to realize this interconnectedness that we all have to the person beside us, regardless of how many differences you feel like you still have more similarities. And if people want to be crass about it, we can just boil that down to science, right? So, with that being said, we've all got to basically say, hey, we are all experiencing this together. We have different perspectives, we have different reactions to it, but it still affects us all because even someone who will try and be disconnected from everything, like myself sometimes, you can still go out and you can feel the energy. I know when George Floyd was first murdered, I felt like when I went outside, I could just cut the tension with a knife. It was gross, it was heavy. And what's crazy about it is I feel like people don't realize that there's a mixture of emotions. I think everyone wants to kind of put it off on maybe the minority population that is angry, or upset or outraged. And sure, all of those things are true, but really that's just a cocktail of other emotions that's really hurt and sadness and disappointment and maybe even sometimes fear. And then on the other side, now this is just speculation, but, I would assume that those who are not a part of a minority population maybe even would feel fear themselves, fear of, oh gosh, is there going to be a big retaliation? Maybe they're one of those who's a little more, whatever, just more accepting of people who are different. And it's like, damn, all the progress that we've made, I feel like we're just going backwards and backwards. And so, just again, I could like spit out example after example, but it's really just saying that, like you guys have said, everyone is experiencing some sort of effect from this type of treatment of just humans out here in the world. And I think that something that a lot of non minority people need to hear is that there is a population of us as well that would be equally outraged or at least similarly outraged, even if I saw a white woman or a white male being mistreated. Again, it just kind of goes to the law of humanity and interconnectedness and how you're supposed to treat another human. So I think, to my last point that I kind of really want to drive home is I want people who are not Black or brown or whatever to realize that you do have a stage to have feelings about it too, and that it's okay to be affected by it. And that conversations like these can really bring those feelings to the forefront where we can start having these conversations together. Because yeah, everyone's affected. And it's just like I think we're all really over it, at this point. And I think, unfortunately, it starts to breed a new problem, which is a population of tapped out people. And you lose that interconnectedness with the next person when you do that. But you tap out of survival sometimes. And it's like, oh, I can't take another heavy spirit today. But then that's not helpful either. So it's like people are becoming desensitized. You have kids who are desensitized to everything because they can watch anything on the internet. They can have access to everything from just seeing murders and such on TV with these televised incidents. Then also, there's websites like Rotten and stuff like that where you can go and literally watch murders. That was out back when I was in high school, and I saw some really fucked up shit up there. I wish I had not seen. You can't unsee it. But long story short, it's like our youth is being desensitized by the overstimulation of just everything that they have access to. Then adults, we're tired, we're just like, oh, I have bills, I have family that I need to take care of, I have myself that I need to take care of. And here we go again. Every time it seems like we're trying to be on the up and up and something optimistic is finally being broadcast on the media. Yet another incident. So it's my tidbit.
Yeah. I mean, it is tiring. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I mean, I'm not only just tired of my own stuff that has nothing to do with this, but just having to understand that I mean, as we speak, people experiencing something that I can't, help them with. That's just me. And given that my role as, a mental health provider,
Mm-hmm.
I wish I could provide that opportunity for assistance and support for people. And I will say, my individual perspective is altered every day. When I sit here, I learn about people all day in their stories. By no means do I speak for all white people or all white females either, but like, I do know there's a lot of people out here who are burdened by fear, whereas, you know, fear originally on a biological level is supposed to be accountability. It's supposed to tell us like, yo, we need to get the hell out or we got to, you know, fight and defend ourselves. But it's been exploited. I don't know if that, I mean, is somewhat intentional. I know the media kind of, you know, I feel myself reacting when I watch the media, and that's part of the reason I stopped doing it for such a long time. But it's now that fear has really, it's taken the choice away from us to be present for each other, to take responsibility for what we do have control over, to relieve ourselves from that reaction by, and I mean, I see people often, and I'm one of them too. It's like when I'm stressed out, when I got too much on my plate, I want to avoid it. I don't want to talk about it. But at the same time, I know that is because I've become so desensitized. I sit here and like deal with people's trauma every day. And, you know, vicariously, of course, I don't have my own personal experience with everyone's trauma, but it's to be witness to how much suffering that brings is exhausting. So, but I even can relate to the concept of desensitization to deal with things. And I think, you know, if this conversation can pull out as many points as it, you know, it can, but to be mindful of that and being like, okay, I know I have to know I'm desensitized. And then I just have to figure out, okay, is there a way that I need to look at this that maybe won't add to my avoidance and like you send me off into the realm of avoidance, or that will just keep me present enough for it to like be something that can actually is real, right? It doesn't have to like be something that overpowers me and sends me in that direction, but it can actually bring me back to the table. So I think that's a very good point for you to make though, Keela, is that we all have to be mindful of our limits, but then also be wary that those limits are because we have a pile of stuff that could turn us off versus like make us just, maybe we don't even need to touch the light switch. Lights don't need to go off, they don't need to go on, but just be like, okay, can I just listen? Can I just be here? Can I just, you know, I don't have to take responsibility for someone else's trauma, but I can be present for the fact that it happened. And, you know, if I'm tying this back into my, you know, something else that I was thinking when Brandon was sharing was that, you know, that one perspective that we have, that we hold, that one way of how we perceive the world, if it triggers a denial response or an avoidance response, that's something to pay attention to.
Yeah.
In anything. That's a little mental health tip right there for anything. Like, it doesn't mean you have to change it right now, but if you stop paying attention to it, you lose control over it. And it becomes something that in turn feeds back into the system of hate, because then we don't have an awareness of what actually is happening for us, right? So that that's all I have to say.
No, I mean, I totally no. I'm glad you touched on that point, because I do see where you're going, or what you're saying. You know, Akila, is basically like you're overwhelmed. You know, because you're inundated with all of, you know, now the Asians are under attack and the blacks are under attack, women are under attack, the LGBTQ community is under attack. That's how those people who are fans of this kind of system, you know, operate. When you're dealing with a more authoritarian a system, and when I'm talking about that, I'm not just talking about politics. You know, even though politics is a big part of it, I'm talking about religion. I'm talking about gender. I'm talking about, you know, politics as well. When you're dealing with a more authoritarian system, you're going to deal with individuals who are trying to affect multiple levels of society. And the best way to get you not to be involved is to overwhelm you.
Sure. Yeah.
So if you are overwhelmed, your natural response is, I need to take care of myself. Like I need to back up, shut down, move away. Whenever you move away, those same bad actors can then occupy that space.
Mhm.
What you end up doing, that moving away, is called normalization, because you accept that you can't change this situation anymore. You relinquish knowledge of it, you know, any kind of influence you might have over it, you know, you're conceding to a certain extent, and you are yielding ground to the individuals who are trying to take that space in their offense, right? So there's this thing in politics called the Overton window. Like, for a politician to say something to the effect of, you know, grabbing women by the genitalia, prior to Trump, you know, it's unheard of. Like, you know, no one would ever say that. Who would vote for something like that? That's craziness. That's crazy talk. No one should be, you know, no one should be in a position of power who has a thought process like that. But by allowing that behavior to continue, you end up allowing people who come after it. You've moved the bar. You've changed the standard. It's the same way in regard to what we choose to check out of whenever we become inundated. That's the point. I want to get you so upset, so outraged, so disturbed, so shocked. You know, Matt Gaetz, you know, being a pedophile. You're watching this all the time. You're hearing this all the time. I'm turning this off. I'm walking away. Then but that's normal. Now we all say, well, you know, that's what politicians do. You know, there was another story about a pedophile over here. Then last week there was another story about a pedophile, and soon it's, when you hear about a pedophile in Congress, and so what? That's just how it is. It's messed up, but that's just how it is.
It's a solid point. I mean, it's like when the body, like if you experience something really jacked up, like if you're in a car accident or something like that, right? And you have a limb that's 99% severed. Sorry to go grotesque. But you know, your body goes into shock. You don't feel it, because if you were to really process that amount of pain and the situation and what you would go through, your body would, you know, freak. It's like you blow a fuse.
Mhm.
And so, you know, you see people who are missing things, you know, after an accident, and they have no idea what's going on. They have no idea that their whatever limb is over there, you know. And like you said, it's like once you hear it so many times over and over, the trauma is just, it is compounded, and it becomes so great to the point where the body says, pull the plug, not doing this anymore. And then people are tapped out. But to your point, or I think to your point, this is dangerous because it kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier. And then also to expound upon what you were saying is, if you hear these things over and over, you see these things over and over, eventually it's normalized. And there is no way on God's green earth that murder of anybody, I don't care, black, white, brown, purple, green, not okay. You know what I'm saying? It's like, especially by authorities that we put in place to protect. That's the oxymoron. That's the really fucked up part about it, because it's like you have the extremists who say, you know, we shouldn't have a police force anymore. You know, let's get rid of them. Then you have me on the other side. I'm like, wait, I have police officers, detectives, all that in my family, and you guys are taking it too far, because when you call 911, who do you want to come to the rescue at that point? It's like, there's bad people, you know, of any whatever. I know black people that I can't stand. I'm like, your moral compass is dusty. I would never be your friend. And I think, again, people need to stay aware and present, like you guys were saying, so that you can still be empathetic enough and humane enough to feel when another human is going through something. But then at the same time, you know, not allow it to be normalized, but then two, protect your own peace. At the same time, it's this delicate balance that you have to go through in life all the time, where it's like, I can't be too tapped in because I have to take care of me, but I can't be too tapped out to where if my brother, my sister of whatever background or color needs me, I can't empathize because I can't. I have no connectedness to it.
Yeah.
So
And what I mean, I guess the way that I address the situation, or address that paradox that you just mentioned is, you know, the funny thing about this is there are multiple fronts to where you can be engaged on some level. Maybe someday, maybe one day, I can pay attention to the George Floyd, trial or whatever. But, and I recognize, I can handle it today, but then tomorrow maybe I can't, but I can, focus on something, else in regard to like, I don't know, gun control maybe or whatever. But at the same time, there's a time where you just need to check out from all of it, and reset. Only the individual can determine that. But I think the main thing is just being conscious of the fact that there is something that needs to be checked on, and also trying to create some objective metrics that don't move. Because, like I said, if you're comfortable with one person, getting choked out in the street, why not two? Why not 10?
Yeah,
Why not 20?
Yeah.
Why not 6 million? So
I have
And I mean, oh, go ahead.
no, actually, I was gonna ask your opinion, actually, so please.
Oh yeah, no, I was just to that point, and I think tying back into what is our responsibility. I guess the way I see it is like the responsibility is building the bridge from the reaction to the response, right? Like I think we all have a reaction to these things when we see them, when we hear them, when we experience them. That is innate based on our personal experience, the trauma, our people we know stories, and how they've influenced us. So we have a reaction. But I guess from my perspective, we can then choose a response. And that response is where the difficulty lies. And I think that's where there's a gap right now in society is people are reacting and they can't necessarily control the reactions that they're having to these experiences because they're so tragic and they're awful. But then building the bridge to the response of like, okay, let me take in all that I'm seeing, let me process this for myself, and then respond in a way that I feel like is appropriate and that I know that I can and I can handle and I can take responsibility for. I think that's where our responsibility comes, is in choosing the response and owning our reaction and digging into ourselves and figuring out, why am I having that reaction in the first place? Because sometimes, like I said, we can't control them. Like we react emotionally to these things for a reason. But again, that's where the responsibility comes, is then building your response. But a lot of people, I mean, myself included at times, we're not willing to do the work and the digging to then formulate a response. Like we stay stuck in reaction because it requires effort to then respond. Does that make sense?
And that's where the concept of privilege comes into play. Like, either the outcome doesn't affect you. And if the outcome doesn't affect you, then, I recognize I have male privilege because there's certain things in regard to women that, that don't affect me. In regard to birth control, I have all the choices in the world. I know there's women who have that, who don't have those choices. And so it's a privilege for me to say, I don't need to focus on that. It's not a big thing. That same type of dynamic exists on different levels of our society. And that's where we have to all be accountable and recognize that.
Yeah. 100%.
Also, I guess here's where the mental health perspective comes in, because I just want to piggyback off what Rachel was saying, is that the bridge to the reaction to the response. First of all, the reaction is natural. There is no controlling. To be honest with you, you're probably healthier if you're having a reaction that you can't control. You can't really and you're maybe overwhelmed, because if you're not even experiencing a reaction, I'd say, let's talk, because it's likely because there's probably been so many reactions that you haven't been able to control, that have not been addressed before, you can go back and actually make a choice about what response you're going to take. And that, I think, of all the things, there's so many things to normalize in this world, but, touching on a little bit, one is, we are out of control over having that reaction to trauma. That is what our bodies are supposed to do. And once you figure out how you can find your power in that response, you can choose the response. And kind of I commonly have themes of my week for some reason. I don't know, it's just probably because of me, since I'm the common denominator. But this past week has been a conversation I've had multiple times with people in different capacities, something versus nothing. Right? Like fear, especially if you've had a lot of unaddressed reactions, it will bring us to the nothing. Do nothing, avoid, just nothing's happening. No other person has any experience that could be like mine. it goes to that all or nothing or that black and white kind of thinking that comes from unaddressed traumas that we've had. But if I could, I try to like condense my brain sometimes for people just to like have bullet points of what to remember. Is just something has to happen, whether it is on an individual level, like just noticing like, okay, I'm having a response. If you don't know what to do with it, that's okay, but noticing it is something. Doing nothing about it and being on to the next thing, that's not even just for like just this talk about racism. That's in the grander scheme of life. You got to pay attention to it. And it will get us farther and further away. Not like you're a bad person or you're doing something wrong, but it's you are severely delaying the process of what is going to actually help you be able to cope in the world. Then, let alone getting back to the conversation about what you can do in terms of race. So, just kind of putting that in there too. From wow, can't control the reaction, but you can control the choice.
Yeah.
I guess that's the other paradox for me is you can't control the reaction, but what are we supposed to be comfortable with? What are we supposed to, like, at what point? There's certain things that we should, like I said before, like, one person dying, you become comfortable with that. 2 people dying, a bus full of people dying, or whatever. Like, at what point are you not supposed to accept, what you're seeing in front of you? At what point is it the responsibility of those people who are creating the circumstances that are facilitating trauma? At what point is it their responsibility to resolve that over you to just accept, what? Every so often, we're going to have to kidnap and kill some Jews. That's just what happens. So the circumstances leading up to that are political, are religious, are gender-based. Those discussions have to be had. Like, we have to be willing to go and traverse some uncomfortable waters. So we have to have some immediate discomfort now to prevent a whole lot of discomfort in the future. That's where we have to focus on what the point of these discussions is about. It's not just about like, everybody feeling good and having, the kumbaya, not to say that's what this is right now, but oftentimes that's the precedent or the pretense that we have when we start having these discussions. We want everybody to feel safe. We want everybody to feel okay. That's great. Like, that's, but I recognize that's an impossibility because everybody at this conversation is at a different place when it comes to the subjects that we are discussing. The overarching thing is we are trying to preserve humanity because something fucked up has happened. That's what brought us to this table to begin with, where we're having this discomfort. And that needs to be addressed, hopefully prevented, so more fucked up things don't happen after that.
So what's the solution? Or what are the solutions with an S? Like, what do, because like you can't just point out the obvious and be like, okay, well, people have to stop murdering people. It's like, okay, yeah, we got that. But like you said, like with these discussions and such, I would almost kind of to your point, Brandon, like maybe even like a Ku Klux Klan like leader, someone who's very, Aryan minded, something like that. Because I think, yeah, I really could not think of like what else.
You over there with the
you catch my drift.
I got you.
Someone like that with, because all of us, even though, like you said, we have different perspectives and ways that we react and look at all of this, I think ultimately we're pretty much on the same page. And like you said, that's great. That's fantastic. I almost want to see these discussions grow to the point to where someone who again knows that I'm coming in and maybe an army of one, or if they want to come and bring a couple of friends that are like-minded and have these discussions, because it's it's cool that we have our moments of, like you said, the kumbaya, and even though we're not intending to, we're more on the humanitarian side of things, right? We're not to the point where our opinions or ways that we go about living our lives is so firm and rooted in whatever it may be that we're not willing to hear another person's perspective. And I think that if we had some really, just hardcore, I mean, I even know Black people who are super, I don't even want to use Black Panthers because I feel like that's such a classic example of Black extremism that's actually very inaccurate.
Yeah,
The Black Panthers are not extremists,
yeah,
actually. So scratch that, but just throwing that out there just for someone to catch. But someone, whoever it is in the Black community that is very militant and
yeah.
very,
I mean, like nation. I mean, the nation. Some of the members of the Nation
yeah,
of Islam,
yeah,
not the entire Nation,
there you
but
go.
some of the members of the Nation of
Yeah,
Islam who preach, Black supremacy or whatever.
yeah,
I hear what you're talking about. The
like
only
that.
problem with that, and I said this before to Sarah, I think it might have been in another perspective circle.
Mhm.
You, whenever you give a platform to extremists, you are normalizing their positions to a certain extent because of the fact that you're basically saying your opinion is just as valid as all these other opinions. So this is the main reason why extremists seek these circles, because in their bubble, they're preaching to the choir. And if they're out in the street corner, no one's going to listen to them. But if they can get on MSNBC or CNN and we all
Yeah.
start talking, then I can start, preaching about my Black extremist views and
Mhm.
increase my audience. So you end up, potentially feeding the beast.
Yeah.
But I recognize from an academic standpoint, it's necessary to hear where they're coming from,
Mhm.
just so you know what you're dealing with.
Mhm.
But back to what I was saying in regard to Sarah, whenever you have a space like this, for instance, where I trust you, I trust you other three in this conversation. I feel like I can say what I want to say or what I'm thinking about because I feel like we've created a space where honest and intelligent discourse that's respectful can be had. I don't feel like any of us here have ulterior motives beyond understanding one another and helping other people understand our perspectives in this circle.
Mhm.
So that being said, like what I did there, I know you do. Look at it, Sarah. But that being said, whenever you bring in someone with a more extremist view, they're not coming here to understand shit. They're coming here because they want to advance their message, hell or high water. If I am a vehement racist, I'm only coming here for one thing and one thing alone, to find other racists here who can help me in regard to my mission, or hopefully get on a broadcast where that can go out to other racists and let them know, what I'm up to in my corner of the world.
Mhm.
So it really comes down to, in my opinion, Akile, the forum and the meaning behind the forum. In a forum like this, I don't know if I would want that, because you have people coming to the table who may be like on the fence in regard to, I want to give, this, this conversation a try. Everybody's telling me I need to do this. I have a bunch of bigots in my family, but, I recognize, maybe there's a different way. And so they're coming to the table with a certain sense of, preloaded hesitation. And then a white supremacist comes in here and they know not only how to advance their message, but how to game the system, to point out the differences between, Sarah, and myself. Well, you see Brandon over there, he's saying this about Black people. And then, Sarah's over there saying this about white people. Can't you see that there's obvious differences between these two people? And so by speaking that language, I might know what the hell is going on. Sarah knows what's going on, but this other person who just came in today, who's on the fence, doesn't know the gamesmanship going on behind the scenes. And now they're like, you know what? Robbie the racist over there, he has some pretty intelligent ideas. I might talk to him after we get off. Let me send him a little DM right here. And now you got somebody else at the Klan rally.
Well, see, let me put something on the other side of the tracks for that. So, even though we see an extremist viewpoint as just that, and will automatically reduce validity from that because it's an extremist viewpoint, it is still someone's organic viewpoint, right?
I agree.
And so, there's that component of it, that their perspective is just as valid as I want mine to be.
Yeah.
So then the other point too that I wanted to make is we can't speculate, right? Just like there may be some white people who feel, okay, if there's a Black extremist, what they label to be as a Black extremist or what have you, is going to come in and they're going to want to sway everybody to feel this way or do that, blah, blah, blah. For one, if you're going to challenge, everyone's perspective to give them something new, it's going to automatically be uncomfortable. And I think it's just the risk that you run if you want to grow, because we've got to have opposites in the conversation to be able to gain better understanding in the middle of the road. And unfortunately, you got to just take the bad with the good. It's like starting a business, and you're like, is this a stupid idea? Is this dumb? Once I put it out there, people are going to be able to criticize me and get on Google and Health Grades or whatever. Fuck it. You know what I'm saying? You can't please everybody. And I think that having those types of people in here and saying, listen, regardless of how ridiculous and effed up I think it may be, at least I can say I tried to gain understanding from that perspective or viewpoint. Because then too, if you're also as passionate about whatever your viewpoints are, even if it's on the humanitarian side, just maybe you can plant a seed in that guy or that lady's head, that even if it doesn't sprout up and grow tomorrow because it's not a weed, maybe it's an oak tree, you know what I'm saying? And maybe 5-10 years from now, it has some sort of effect. But I think you have to be able to take the challenges that come with it. Like I said, everyone's perspective, fortunately or unfortunately, is equally valid. And so it just kind of is what it is. Like I said, because we all pretty much agree. And like I said, that's great. But I'm like, how does someone like the extreme, yeah, it's like, how does running and turning in here, what makes you think or feel that way?
I get you. I mean, and that's kind of like what I was saying too in regard to what Sarah was talking about with setting this thing up. Because I said to her too, it was like, why don't we just open this thing up, just publish the meeting ID and the password. I'll just go ahead and put it on my page and we just let anybody come in, and say whatever they want to say. And the problem with that initially, in my opinion, and Sarah also agreed, was, because these discussions are in their infancy, they're very, very easy to derail right now if you have a bad actor who decides that's what they want to do. So, recruitment, that's a best case scenario. Worst case scenario is you get brigaded by a bunch of bigots who suddenly, midstream decide they want to just, pull down their pants and flash their genitalia because they know that, we're recording this or whatever. Yeah. So, but I agree with you. Like, I think it's just about the forum for me, the forum, the time, the place. If you're just starting to have these discussions, you want to get people up to speed in regard to what are the ground rules. If we're going to talk like this, how are we going to talk? What are we going to talk about? What subject matter are we going to cover? I'm saying, there should be no holds barred in regard to what discussions are had, but how those discussions are. Like, okay, nobody's gonna be calling anybody else a bitch in here. Like, we're just not gonna do that. These are the rules, and that way everybody feels, okay, this is, for lack of a better term, a safe space to have the discussion, regardless of what my perspective might be. I can be racist all day long, but I'm not gonna be able to use slurs here. So if I'm going to present my ideas about, white supremacy, I'm going to have to find some other way to communicate that than, calling, people nigger all day long. I'm not going to be able to do that.
Well, so right there, you just put it out there. You don't have to open it up to where it's just wide open to go from how it is now with, a personal meeting ID and a password to come one, come all type of thing without any filtering. I think, as it grows, and then too, you can have it where it's different types of forums on different weeks. There could be some where it's kind of like we have more of this kind of grounded, like-minded type of discussion. And then another time it could be, hey, we're going to have a conversation with XYZ, whether it's a random person or so if there's even someone that you ever plan, that you like kind of put into motion. So it's like, I think that there's room to have both. It just depends on what tone you set. And like you said, when it comes to ground rules, putting those out there first, because I just feel like discomfort is the only way in which you grow. And I'm
And you're
pretty
absolutely
firm.
right. It is the only way. And I'm gonna kind of curtail this back around a little bit, but then also kind of close up because I know, Brandon, you said you have a time constraint. And but kind of bringing it back to one, I need you to clarify, what's it called? Overton's window?
Yeah, the Overton window. I mean, it's used in
Overton window.
politics all the time. It's like, you say something extremely. I mean, you say or do something that's extreme, and then whenever you walk your actions back, you walk it back. Like, here's the line. And so I'm gonna do something that's all the way over here, and everybody's outraged at what I'm doing over here. So you walk it back. When you walk it back to here. So now here's the line. Now I'm gonna do something all the way over here, and then now I walk it back. Now we move over here. And so,
well, in my world, that's what we call manipulation.
no, it's
So, and like low-key gaslighting, depending on the motive.
that's
But
really what it is.
honestly, what I take away from that, right, and just in different terms though, is it's strategy. It is that individual's purpose and strategy of like how whatever they want, or sometimes it's a need if it's an individual person to be met. And I feel like in terms of perspective circles, why I've started this, and I will build it, is because it's strategy. We have to, as a group of individuals, not even like, I feel like if I say group of people, that I guess takes away and minimizes the power of each individual perspective, is that we make up the system. We can't change the legislature. We have people trying to do that, but we can change each other's way of seeing things by hearing each other. And so the strategy behind that is, one is talking about it, but, and I will like kind of pull and perfect this out, pull this out and perfect it a little bit more, but is just trying to find that way of relatability. I can think is that's one of the main principles of this, is that, Keela and you all talked about it, is that we're like-minded. If I take a look, I know we're all educated above a bachelor's level degree of education. Doesn't matter about the color of our skin. Right now, we all do kind of individually know each other for the most part. So it's like there is an interconnection there, but we have been willing to find something and how we can relate to each other, whether that be to have this discussion or whether it to have our individual friendships outside of this place. And if I'm, speaking to the people that are still questioning whether or not they're able to have these conversations, is that is, and I mean, to be preparing for disappointment is probably, anticipated, because you're not going to get a whole lot of, outcome right away. But to believe, like, no one's a lost cause when it comes to having this conversation. You may get turned down, you may get cussed out, but if you can find that way, be like, okay, they're still not ready to have this conversation. Aggression in this point is just people operating out of that denial pattern. And if you can try to adopt that mindset, and especially when you guys talk to, part of the purpose with this is bringing people in their social capital back into the space, is finding those people who are able to find a sense of relatability with one another, and can have, and in turn, they don't have to be ready to have the conversations. They could really just be ready to listen and to hear. But that is essentially what is going to bring us to seeing some kind of change, to influence the system, because people will start listening. And just kind of as like an announcement aspect to tie this up, Rachel and actually mostly Rachel, I facilitate, but she does the research, but we're pulling names out of the local government to extend invitations to. I kind of need to get some things off my personal plate to be able to, be consistent with that, but it's happening, and it's going to get a little bit more organized. But thankfully, just keeping the momentum of like, I put this on my schedule like it's a doctor's appointment. Like, it means something to me, because I had to make a commitment to find some way to make sure this doesn't get swept up under the rug in any capacity. Just something, right? Even if we end up having the same conversation, It's, you know, I don't want to say it's always frustrating. I can't speak for people, but I know sometimes it can be discouraging for me to be like, oh, well, are people actually getting something out of this? But if I sit in that, I'll stop doing it. I'll lose the momentum. So I just have to believe that it's not a lost cause. At least I will have attempted. I've created some kind of influence. If anything, you know, Rachel's could put it on her learning agreement for school, you know, like, you know, it's influenced something. And so share it if you're willing. And, you know, if it pops up into your mind, especially with family members, because I know we all have those people in our lives that can relate to this in some way but aren't willing to, is saying it respectfully that it's happening, it's still a thing. Is if you piss someone off, like you said, you can't make anyone, you know, everyone happy, but that is your truth. That is, if you find a passion and a relatability to share that message in that moment, then it does put energy out towards fixing the problem.
Thanks. It was
Agreed.
nice talking to you all night.
Yeah, likewise. Have a good evening.
I will see y'all later, I guess in 2 weeks or something. Yeah.
All right. Let me know.
All right.
Good night,
Bye.
everyone.